Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear viewers, we've come to another episode of Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path. And in this episode, the first part anyway, I'd like to focus on an aspect of consulting that I did for another university. There was an ulterior motive initially. A friend of mine was thinking of going to work for that university, and he said to me, "Daud, why don't you come and join me?" And we were good friends, and I thought, well, my wife's a very good friend of his wife, and it would be nice to go. And there are certain aspects about the work that I'm under pressure with that it'd be nice to get out from under. But I said, okay, I'll have to arrange for me to come down. He said, okay. So the Secretary General of the University of the Arab Emirates at Al Ain, he phoned me and he said, "Can you come down?" I said, "No, not like that." I said, "How long do you want me for?" He said, "You might as well come down for 10 days. I said, "Well, I'm coming down for 10 days. I said, "You'll have to get permission from my president to come down." "Okay," he said, "I'll do that." So I wrote to the president, and I got a letter from the president authorizing me to go. And I went down. They provided a car and a driver, and he gave me a big file. And the file was on hardware only for computers for students. Well, how can you size hardware if you don't know what's going on it? And you know what the students are going to do with these boxes if you don't know what they're going to be using to do it with? I mean, was it word processing? Was it spreadsheets? What was it? I didn't know. So I went back to him and I said, "You know, this is fine as far as it goes, but I need to know the applications." "Oh," he said, "we don't talk about those, Daud." I said, "But I can't do anything with this as it stands, because I can give you a standard box which will cover most things, but a lot of students would have specific requirements. I mean, do you need communications on them, for instance? How are you going to communicate with the computers that you've got? What have you got on the computers now that they can actually communicate with?" "Oh, we haven't thought about anything like this, Daud." Oh. He said, "Tell you what," he said, "why don't you do a survey of our facilities and requirements and write a report on it?" I said, "Okay." He said, "You've got a driver, you can go around the various departments and I'll give you authorization to go in and talk to anyone you want to, and any questions they have to answer." I said, "Okay, fine." So I did this. Now there were about 17 units that I went to, spaced in Al Ain, and the easiest one was actually the girls' campus, because that was purpose-built, so it was all self-contained. But for instance, the library was an entity on its own, in a building on its own, and various colleges were scattered around in various locations, and even the admin was another sort of set of buildings. So I went through all of these and I drew up the plans, and then I looked at it and I said, "It's not going to work like this." So then I actually started going back to what have they got in the computing centre and what are they doing with it. And then having got through that, I got to the stage that really they should be looking to see what their future is, and if they want Arabic computing, and they did, then they've got to evaluate the levels of Arabic available on which computers. So I went through that aspect to start with, and then I talked about standards, I talked about communications, I talked about protocols, and how they've got to go through all of this first to define the network, and then they've got to start talking about how to build the network. And I went to talk to the PTT, the telephone company that would be responsible for all the communication channels, and they could do basically anything, which was good. Okay, and I wrote that up, that they can do this and you can do this and you can set it all up. And I started with the philosophy that you could interface anything to anything. Okay, even if you couldn't at that time, the chances are, or the probability was, that you would be able to do it with time. Okay, so that's how I started, and then I wrote all this up, and I went through all the definitions and then the proposals and so on and so forth, and I wrote it as a full report, and I just about finished it and got it typed. They gave me a secretary to type it and had it typed, and I used to get up about 8 o'clock in the morning for the driver and go around these various departments, and go around them till about I don't know, maybe 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then I'd break, get something to eat, play squash for instance, and then I'd sit down at about 10 o'clock and I'd write till about 4 o'clock on what I'd got that day and what I was going to do the next day. And so I went through this for so many days, and then I was only there 10 days, and that included a weekend. And then on the last day I actually had to give a presentation to a committee, and I gave it. And as we were coming out, people were saying to me, "You did it." I said, "What do you mean I did it? I gave the presentation." "Yeah." No, they've accepted it." I said, "They have?" I had no indication that they'd accepted what I told them, but apparently they had. When I went back to the Secretary General, he said, "Daud, we appreciate what you've done. I can only give you a token sum for it." He said, "We had Doolittle's do the same thing, and we paid them a lot more money than we can pay you." He said, "But we're accepting your proposal, and I can only give you a token sum for it." I said, "That's all right." I said, I'm happy to do it. It's a question of contributing again to a Muslim country. So he said, "We'd like to offer you the job of director of the computer center." "Oh," he said, "then you can do all this." And that at that time was an incentive, if you like. And on top of that, I would have got about 20% more, 25% more in my salary. But unfortunately, I decided to stay in Saudi Arabia because of the Haramain and because my wife was settled there, apart from anything else. So I said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to turn you down." But I said, "At least I've given you something which you can work with now." And in fact, I went back to Saudi. My friend didn't go there either, okay? And they actually got someone to handle the project, and the computing facilities at Al Ain actually became one of the best in the world. One of the best in the Middle East anyway, and actually very good. They were ahead of most people. They put in ATM very quickly. So that was a step forward, I thought. And I was pleased about that, because at least I'd done the background. Now what I did from that, of course, was to submit that to the Council of Engineering in the UK, and I got Chartered Engineer out of that. I had an interview in the UK, and my attitude was, if I was doing something in the Middle East, let me compare the standard there with the standard in the UK. And so I'd written up the work I'd done at King Fahd University, and I got Fellow of the British Computer Society, and I got Fellow of the British Institute of Management, but on the basis of the work that I'd done there. So now I wrote this up and I submitted that, and I got Chartered Engineer from that. So alhamdulillah, you know. But the idea was, am I conforming to Western standards? Am I doing my own thing, you know? And this was one way of checking it. Okay, or at least I thought so. And of course it was another way of getting a professional recognition, if you like, too, and knowing that I was moving forward and not standing still. And we should be developing ourselves anyway, wherever we're working as Muslims. So that was another way of looking at that. So alhamdulillah, and they went ahead and they put this in, and then they were, well, they did very well. I went back to King Saud University, and none the worse for wear, really, although I was a bit tired after those days. It was hectic, but I'd enjoyed it, and it was another approach to a computing campus, basically. And I'd worked on a small one, the technical one, where everything was short range. I was in King Saud University, where the biggest distance we had between campuses was 1,500 kilometers, which is quite a distance. And then I was on a short range campus which was spread out. So it's all forms of distributed computing, and I was looking at that as opposed to centralized computing. So, you know, it was quite an experience, it was quite a learning curve. And I actually enjoyed it, but it was a struggle. But anyway, alhamdulillah. And I went back to King Saud University and continued with there. And then I wrote up what was necessary for them, and just before I left, I put in a request for bids to replace the mainframe facilities with the most up-to-date equipment available, and to build a network which was modular in concept, based on ATM, so that any new building coming on campus could be added as a module and be replicated without actually overloading the system. So I'd done that because we had something like 1,000 terminals distributed around the campus, And then we brought in more than 1,000 PCs, and we had to connect these by local area networks. And so the whole system was growing and growing and growing. And instead of getting limited on the local area networks, I wanted to bring in ATM where we could give preference to student classes, because some were needed at specific times, and that could be done through ATM. So that was the reason for that. And also putting fibre optics in all buildings, and any new building that came up be wired with fibre optics as well. So now the whole thing was modular and could be done very easily. But they wouldn't let me do that. I couldn't evaluate the bids. And on top of that, I'd asked for the faculty to have access to any equipment coming on campus to be tested for conformity with the standards which were on campus, because at that time ATM was not a fully defined standard. So we needed to make sure it was compatible, and if it went through the College of Computer Science, their master students or PhD students could actually learn about the box and about the techniques and so on and so forth, and make sure it was compatible with what was required on campus or what was already installed on campus. This is another way of transferring the technology. That's what I was trying to do, because a lot of people talk about bringing in things into a developing country, but how often is the technology actually transferred? And this is the big problem. And I was concerned with the transfer of technology as well. Anyway, we've come to the end of this part, so let me finish here for the moment and have a short break, and inshallah we'll meet again soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear viewers, let me welcome you to this part of Sirat al-Mustaqim, and I've been talking about networking and computers, and it looks like everything is smooth and it just flows and you just do what it is and everything's happy. But I want to now look at some of the problems that you get, okay, and to show you in essence the sort of pressures that one gets in these sort of fields. I mentioned in the previous episode that a registration system in King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals actually was down for 3 days when I wasn't there, and there was a problem, and I was told that I couldn't go out on vacation any time during registration in the future. Well, now we had a problem in King Saud University. When I went to King Saud University in 1986, there was something like 25,000 students. By the time I left, it was close to 50,000 students, 45 to 50,000 students. The last 3 years, the intake was 8,500, 10,500 and 12,000 new students, which is a huge quantity, and they weren't graduating that number of students. Okay, so the growth was phenomenal, and the systems they were trying to bring in were new, and in one case they had a system developed and it went up on the computer, and in actual fact I couldn't register any students. And now the problems. What are you going to do about it? Well, the first thing to do is to check that you've done everything you can with your computer yourself, you've got the capacity that you need, and so on and so forth. So we did all that, and it was all right. But then came the next problem: how to solve the problem that we've got when we can't define the problem. And my attitude was that there was a particular device which was a fast input-output device, which would, no matter how much you hit it with input and output, it would always give a measured response. And I thought that might be the answer to what we wanted. And the short-term solution was whether the oil company had one of these boxes de-installed that we could get access to. So I mentioned this to the Dean of Registration, and he said, do what you can. I said, you need a letter from the President to the Chairman of the Board of the oil company, Saudi Aramco, because in bureaucratic establishments you make the decision coming down, you never try to work up, it's impossible. If the Chairman of the Board has made the decision, everyone else will agree. So there's no problem then. So anyway, he said okay. So and then a company representative from the vendors went to Aramco and found that they had one of these boxes de-installed. They contacted me and told them, and we got the letter sent to the Chairman of the Board, and he approved it. And now I had to make a technical case to get the box from Aramco, they set up a conference call. They had about 5 people at the other end, went through why I needed it, what it would do, what we had done, what we could do, what we didn't know, and they agreed with me that they didn't know it would work, but I had no alternative. So we got the box, and we got it back in about another day, and we got it installed, and it solved the problem, alhamdulillah. But in the meantime, the Dean of Registration had to go on the TV and explain why the largest university in the Middle East couldn't register a student for 3 days. So it's a non-trivial problem now. Not only does the university know about it, the community knows about it, the whole world knows about it basically. And now it's a lot of pressure on everyone. So you can see where this comes back to. There's one guy trying to solve this problem, okay? And most people think that it can't be solved. Okay, and even the guy that's working on it doesn't know that he's got the right solution. It's all guesswork. Okay, but alhamdulillah, it did solve the problem, and the thing was up and running, and then they could start doing some work, and they did register the students, and afterwards the registration system was reworked is probably the best word for it. And we actually cut it down, and then we get even more users on, more than they wanted, and now we got all the response time as well. So alhamdulillah, everything was going very well indeed then, but it did take a lot of effort, and of course a lot of people were upset about certain things, and a lot of finger pointing and so on and so forth, but ultimately it was all resolved. Everything fell back into place and everyone was happy. But that's the sort of pressure that you get in this type of environment. You might think a university environment is somewhat laid back, it's somewhat relaxed, but you remember you've got student classes, okay? They may have their own computer, so it's not your problem, okay? But there is backup for the academics, there's backup for the students in the computer centre, there's help available. I used to have what I called college consultants that would support the academic efforts if they were needed it, and also the student efforts, a help desk for instance, and so on and so forth. So we had this type of support for the academics and also for the administration. The library system was automated, for instance, that was on the computer, that was Arabized, and registration in the financial system, all running on the same computers, and we're responsible for all this stuff and trying to make sure there's no problems. But as I say, once that problem was solved, the registration system was good, and now with the personal computers coming in, the registrar, for instance, could work on his personal computer offline, and when he wanted to, he would come online and do the same thing. It took a long time before we could transfer Arabic across the interface from the personal computer to the mainframe, because that required certain equipment and a certain type of box, and we couldn't just put the box in. The network had to be set up, the protocols had to be established, and so on and so forth. So it was done, and once it was done, the situation was good for everyone, not just the registrar. We could set up one single line, one single point of entry where all these protocols matched just for the registrar, and that was done, okay? But we couldn't do that for the library, we couldn't do that for other people until we got this central connection, and eventually that was done. But everything had to be in place for that, and once that happened, people were saying, why couldn't you do it before? Well, you have to plan all these things, you have to spend money on it, and you have to make sure they're all working in the same direction, and it takes time. And this is where the strategic planning came in, and also the strategic plan being something like a 5-year plan. Then you've got the operational plan and the implementation plan. So there's even a lot to it once you iterate it down from the strategic plan. And of course you've got to get approval for what you want to do first, and that means spending money. And that's not always available, although in Saudi Arabia that wasn't quite such a problem. But it didn't mean you could get things just as you wanted them. You couldn't, okay? And I was also trying to change the systems which the students were using to cut the costs of computing for student computing. Okay? Initially it was very high, then it came down to about 10%, 20% of that, which was a big thing. And then we were expanding the facilities now. So you can see that the costs were actually, although they were increasing, they're increasing in a, shall I say, a realistic way rather than a big jump. Okay, and so there was a measured sort of input, and you could actually see the growth and what was happening, and compare that you were in fact getting value for money, if you like. And I don't think there was any issue about that. And then I also started to publish availability times of the computer, downtimes and availability times, and when the backups were done, and so on and so forth. Because one of the registrars, he used to think that computing was like turning on a utility. You turn the water tap, for instance, and the water comes. He switched on his computer and he had instant computing all the time. And if he suffered from insomnia, as he did, he used to come in early in the morning or very late at night and expect to find the computer running for him. Of course, we'll be doing backups and he couldn't get into the computer. And then he complained to the president in the morning. And my boss would be on the line. Why couldn't the registrar use the computer when he wanted to? I said, well, what time was it? Oh, it was 2:30 in the morning. Well, we're doing backups and he's not supposed to be in. I used to go along and have a chat to him, and so long as people understood him, he was very good. So it was, you know, it's a question of building personal relationships as well. You asked me about cultural relationships at one time, and it's a question of building personal relationships as well, and getting people to understand you, and you understanding them and their requirements. And once he understood that there were backups taking place for 2 hours, then he purposely wouldn't come in that time, okay? And that's what you want, okay? You're not forcing him to work the hours you want him to work. You're trying to tell him that, look, you've got work to do, I've got work to do, can we come to some sort of compromise, okay? And that's how it was. And it worked very well, ultimately. But you've got to make the communication, you've got to get the breakthrough, and you've got to get people to understand you. And it's no good you saying one thing and doing something else. They've got to be able to trust you. And all this comes back to Islam and the Islamic ethics in a way. And this is what I liked about the whole system of working in Saudi Arabia. You had this type of ethics in general, but it's not prevalent everywhere, unfortunately. But you can get it in your own community. And you can get the ethos in the university where you're working. If people trust you, they're going to do things with you and for you and help you, and like you're helping them. And alhamdulillah, that worked very well in both universities where I worked. And I think I was happy and lucky like that. Okay, so I think I'll end this episode here with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.